What's going on, guys? Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here from RotoWire. We're talking waiver wire for fantasy basketball. Looking ahead to the coming week, Thanksgiving week. Bit of an interesting schedule, but a pretty packed schedule overall, Alex. We got 18 teams with 4 games on the schedule starting this coming Monday. 10 teams play 3 games. Only 2 teams have a 2-game week. Those 2 are Milwaukee and, mercifully, the Philadelphia 76ers, who outside of Jared McCain have not been very kind to us for fantasy purposes. You and I each have a list of a bunch of players we'll run through, waiver wire suggestions for all sorts of leagues. We'll get deeper and deeper as the video goes along. Do you want to kick it off with Elfrid Payton, Alex?
Obviously. Man, I wish I knew whether or not that I could actually give that advice to pick up Elfrid Payton. Unfortunately, if you're in that deep of a league, you may have to think about it, unfortunately. In terms of, I think, just guys you got to make sure in shallow leagues, like Dalton Knecht had that big game the other night. He's 49% rostered. Shaedon Sharpe, 47% rostered. And Bilal Coulibaly, curiously, has fallen to 46% rostered in Yahoo leagues. I think that's because he's dealing with an injury, but I would just say make sure all those guys are rostered if you happen to be in like an 8 or a 10 team league.
Yeah, I mean, even Jared McCain is still out there in a bunch of leagues. I know his roster rate is hanging around 50% right now in ESPN. So look, if you're playing in normal leagues or deeper leagues, we're giving you guys who are probably already snapped up. But again, if you are in a shallow league, there is production to be had out there. And with Paul George going down with that same hyperextended knee last night, I do think the Jared McCain run can continue. I also think the Dalton Knecht run can continue, not at the level that it was the last game when he put up 37, but I think he's going to remain in this rotation. We've already seen the Lakers pull back on D'Angelo Russell. Gabe Vincent, just not really a factor for this team. I think they could move on from him at some point. Jared Vanderbilt, we have no idea when he's going to be back. The Lakers need this shooting. I've never seen LeBron this happy. He has his first real knockdown shooter in like 3 years. And, I looked this up today. 48 of Knecht's 57 made field goals this season have been assisted. So, it's helping the assist numbers for guys like LeBron. He's assisted on over 20% of Dalton Knecht's makes on the year. A couple other names I'll throw out right away. We talk about him every week, but Donovan Clingan continues to play really well in Portland. He's under 20% rostered in ESPN leagues. The Blazers do have 4 games coming up in the week ahead, so that's big in weekly lineup leagues. DeAndre Ayton, of course, has missed 4 straight games. He's dealing with a finger injury, so he should be back in the near future, but you just never know with Ayton or the Blazers at this point. Either way, I think Clingan has played well enough over this last week and a half that he probably warrants a few more minutes, even when Ayton is back in the mix. 13 blocks over the last 3 games alone for Donovan Clingan. He has at least 1 block in all 15 games this year.
The main problem with Clingan, other than, like you mentioned, the minutes potential to go down when Ayton comes back, is he just is a foul machine. I looked it up the other day. He had led the league in total shooting fouls, and he's playing 17 minutes a game. That is something to keep in mind. But I'll transition this into one of my standard league suggestions, which is Rob Williams. This is more of a daily moves league play. Like if you're in a weekly league and you're rostering Rob Williams, like that's going to be really hard to do. But Portland does play 5 games from this Friday through next Friday. So if you're in a daily moves league, you can swap them in and out. Whether or not Ayton comes back, there should be opportunities for you to get Rob Williams in your lineup. And obviously he can provide you good field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks.
I'll give you a couple of Orlando Magic players, Alex. Once again, Goga Bitadze, still under 15% rostered in ESPN leagues. 4-game week coming up for Orlando. Wendell Carter is still just questionable for life at this point. We have no idea when he's going to come back. Bitadze is giving you 10 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists per game, 1.7 blocks since moving into the starting lineup, shooting 70% from the field, 78% at the line as well. Jonathan Isaac, under 5% rostered in ESPN leagues. Really just targeting the defensive stats when it comes to Isaac, but he does have 10 blocks in his last 4 games. I think Bitadze is tethered pretty directly to Wendell Carter. So whenever Wendell Carter is back, whether it's this coming week or 5 weeks from now, you're going to want to pull back on Bitadze. But I do think Jonathan Isaac, he's going to be in that 18 to 24 minutes role no matter what, especially while they're out or without Banchero, I should say. So I think there might be a little bit more of a long runway with Isaac.
And also, I don't have this guy on my list, but you prompted me to look it up. Anthony Black is only 20% rostered. I have him in at least one 12-team league. He had 2 big games back-to-back, 20 and 9 with 3 steals against Phoenix, 17 and 8 against Clippers in that fun game last night. And someone who even when he's not scoring, which will be fairly often because he's not a fantastic scorer, he's shown an ability to get assists and steals, which a lot of people need off the wire.
Yeah, I have him on my list as well. Like you said, the 2 big games back to back, really encouraging. Those were pretty easily his 2 best games of the season. The steals do tend to come in bunches for him. It's a little Bub Carrington-esque where, he'll have 3 steals one game and then he'll go 3 straight games without one, but should balance out, you would think, to about a steal per game. Would not count on the 3-point shooting. It's been better of late, but he's been very up and down as a shooter. Nonetheless, should continue to be opportunity for him. Who else you got on your list?
I would say you don't have to roster him, but Marcus Smart, 22% rostered. The John Morant updates have not been that encouraging. I mean, he subluxed his hip, which is basically when your hip dislocates and then relocates like right away.
Yeah.
And they keep saying he's week to week. I really don't know when he's going to be back. So Marcus Smart, someone who he's missed the past 3 games with an illness, so he should be back soon. But just someone in the past, and even this season, we've seen be able to put up 5-6 assists with a couple steals. He's not. Again, we know who Marcus Smart is at this point. I just think he's a bit under rostered given the Morant situation.
I'll give you a few wing eligible players. Peyton Watson in Denver, 3-game week coming up for him. He's 6% rostered in ESPN. 14 points, 4.5 boards, 1 steal, 1.3 blocks, and 1.7 threes per game over his last 7. Probably got a couple more weeks at least until Aaron Gordon is back in the mix. And, Jokic being out these last few games has certainly helped, but I still think Peyton Watson, until Aaron Gordon is back, is going to be rosterable in deeper leagues. Julian Champagnie for the San Antonio Spurs. He has quietly started every game this season. And, Wembanyama and Vassell being out of late, that's kind of thrown things into a bit of a tizzy. Sohan obviously is out for a few more weeks. So we'll see how that rotation solidifies long-term. But he scored in double figures in 8 of his last 9 games, 12.5 points, 5.5 boards, 1.5 assists, 2.9 threes in that 9-game span. Should continue to see increased minutes until Sohan is back. And that could be, a month plus at this point. We're not really sure on him. And then Dorian Finney-Smith for the Brooklyn Nets. 4-game week coming up for him. Got off to a slow start. He was somebody in deeper leagues you'd see come off the board. A lot of people dropped him early on, but he has been better over these last couple of weeks. Specifically, his last 3 games, he's averaging 30 minutes, 15.5 points, 4 made threes per game. Defensive stats with him have been a little bit hit or miss, but he did pile up a bunch of steals early in the season. But you're really after the threes here, and you're just kind of crossing your fingers for a good week on the defensive end.
You mentioned Peyton Watson, who I think is a bit under rostered, partially because the Nuggets had a bad schedule the past 2 weeks. From this Friday to next Wednesday, they play 4 games. And we actually got news like just a little while ago for us when we're recording this video that Nikola Jokic did not practice on Thursday. At this point, I think that has to put Dario Saric in consideration for deep leagues. I hate to say it, but his past 3 games, 28 minutes, 9 points, 8 boards, 3 assists, 2 steals. Those are averages, and we just don't know. So in a daily moves league, if it's a deep league, he's someone you can add.
I'm going to throw out our old pal TJ McConnell. Pacers have a 4-game week coming up. The injuries in Indy have helped. Ben Shepherd's been out. Aaron Nesmith's been out. They've just had kind of a bunch of guys in and out on a nightly basis. But even so, I think McConnell's role is always going to be pretty static. He's always going to see roughly the same workload off the bench. He has at least 1 steal now in 12 consecutive games. He's got 7 steals over the last 2 games alone. So that's really what you're targeting in category leagues, but he'll give you some assists. He scores really efficiently for a player of his size. He's shooting like 55% from the field. He's somebody to keep an eye on. If you need 3-pointers, Corey Kispert starting to come alive in Washington. He's averaging over 3 made threes per game over his last 5, playing 31 minutes per game in that stretch. And then I think we need to talk about the Dallas Mavericks, Alex. Luka Doncic going to miss at least a week with his latest injury. So, Quentin Grimes, Jaden Hardy, maybe Najee Marshall, all these guys could be in play in deeper formats.
Hardy's on my list. He's 1% rostered. We know Luka's going to miss a week. That's the case. The last time Luka missed a game, Hardy played 24 minutes, 13 points on 9 shots, 3 rebounds, 1 assist. He's not a great assist guy, but for his career, per 36, basically 18 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. We know he's a microwave guy, right? So he's certainly an option for the upcoming week.
I have a few more deep league options on my list, but anybody else you want to hit before we get to those?
I think you briefly touched on the Paul George re-injury, the hyperextension. We don't have a lot of news on that right now, but that puts Caleb Martin back in the I think the rosterable zone. He's 12% rostered right now. Just does a little bit of everything. Certainly someone, from a schedule perspective, if they have 4 games, you can just throw in there, and he'll just rack up stats for you.
Yeah, only a 2-game week coming up for Philly, but they do have 4 games the week after. Again, as we record this, we're not sure how much time Paul George is going to miss, but considering it's the same knee the second time in a month, I mean, this could easily be a multi-week absence for him. I'll empty out my list here. I have Duncan Robinson, who has a 4-game week coming up, multiple made threes now in 8 consecutive games. He started earlier in the week with both Jaquez and Rozier out. Expectation is that Terry Rozier's back in the lineup over the weekend. Rozier's just been terrible of late. They can't really depend on him, so maybe we do see more Duncan Robinson. And Jaquez himself feels like he's been injured like 4 separate times already this season. So they just have a team of guys who are perpetually either unreliable or banged up. You could throw Jimmy Butler into that category as well. So if you need some threes, look at Duncan Robinson. And if we're getting really deep here, Alex, people in the comments keep telling us we're not going deep enough. Here you go. This is what you asked for. Delon Wright of the Milwaukee Bucks. Only 2 games this week for Milwaukee, but if you're very, very desperate for steals in a deep league, that's somewhere you can look. Delon Wright, always near the top of the league in steal rate.
Yeah, those steal rate guys, when they get a high volume of games, are an option. A couple of guys on my list who are fewer or less than 10% rostered, so deep league options. Wembanyama, really unclear when he's going to be back from his injury, and we saw Charles Bassey have a couple nice games, so someone to keep an eye on. Kevin Porter Jr., Norman Powell is out for the next 2 games. KPJ had a nice game the other night. I'll touch on this in a little bit, but the Clippers from this Friday to next Friday play 5 games. So even if Norman Powell does come back, KPJ can be in your lineup in daily leagues. For the Pacers, Quenton Jackson, 0% rostered on Yahoo. There you go for the true sickos. Had to be a career high, 24 points the other night. 2 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 steals against Houston. Now that game kind of was a blowout late, but Jackson's per 36 for his career is pretty good. It's 13 points, 6 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals. And the reality is this Pacers team, Halliburton is just not playing well. Mostly on the road. There's some bizarre shooting splits there. They're also really banged up. So that's just someone, again, for your sicko leagues out there to keep an eye on.
I do want to touch on the Pelicans just because we have to. I know I joked about Elfrid Payton at the top of the show. Is there anybody, whether it was one of the creative players in that starting lineup the other night or anybody else that we haven't touched on that you'd be targeting? I mean, it's hard to judge because they held out Ingram and Trey Murphy. We'd expect them to be back. McCollum could be back at any time now. He's been practicing, did not play on Wednesday, but feels like he could be back in the next few days. A little bit tougher to tell on someone like Jordan Hawkins. DeJounte Murray's still probably a week or 2 out. Is there any real value here, or is this just kind of take it day by day and for the next game?
I think you have to take it day by day because you kind of look at the game logs for these guys, and they'll have one bad game, and then they'll get in the 4th quarter and clean up a bunch in garbage time. And like Jamal Cain had a good game. Antonio Reeves, is probably a name that is worth pointing out because he scored a career high 34 against Cleveland in that blowout. What's a 2nd round pick this season? How much is he even really going to play going forward? You mentioned the impending return of CJ McCollum. So I think that's a day by day. If you're in a deep league, you can stream those guys in, whoever's available.
Antonio Reeves almost scored more points than he has career NBA minutes played last night. That's where we're at right now with the New Orleans Pelicans. You mentioned it earlier in the video as far as catering to some daily leagues. We talk a lot about weekly leagues. You and I play in both formats, but I know you have some notes on the upcoming schedule and some daily streaming options.
Yeah, if you play in daily leagues, so daily waiver moves, daily starting lineups, I know a lot of people do out there, so it's good to mention that. There are 6 teams from this Friday through next Friday that play 5 times. So nice, dense schedules. That's Brooklyn, Chicago, Indiana, the Clippers, Portland, and Sacramento. And I don't want to list every single name on here, but it's you can look at Dorian Finney-Smith. You could look at Jarris Walker in Indiana, Derrick Jones Jr. This is a week for him. There's a million guys on Portland. I have 5 guys listed for Portland that are under 33% rostered, and they play 5 games from Friday to Friday. So that is prime stuff. And for Sacramento, DeMar DeRozan is coming back. Kevin Huerter is still an option.
All right, really good stuff, man. That'll do it for this week's waiver wire video. We'll be doing this every single week throughout the NBA season, so make sure you check back. Give this video a like if you're enjoying it, and please make sure you're subscribed to the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel. That way you won't miss any of our content. You can find all of our podcasts as well, 4 episodes per week, live and archived right here on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel.